does Zen, let's say, formulate the infinite as relational to the finite?
Yes.
And so you
Empty,
can enter
empty,
into.
emptiness is form, form is emptiness. Exactly, explicitly.
Mhm. So I mean, I know this is going to sound weird, but then why don't people pray in Zen?
They do. So I happen to know a Zen Roshi,
Uh-huh.
and he prays and he chants and so forth.
What is what's the infinite like? Does it have a sense of humor?
I'm sorry, Jordan. You're going to have to be more precise in what you mean by that question.
Well, one of the things of something that has a character relationship is that it has a character relationship, and so the question is something like,
Well, okay, let me answer that. Let me answer that first. Okay, so this is Schellenberg, who's an atheist, but he says what we're talking about sacred is, it's ultimately real, and again, not in the neutral sense, in the ontonormative. I want to participate in it. So that's a relationship term. I want to participate in it. I want to conform to it. I want to reciprocally open. I want to be realized by it as I realize it. All of that. Secondly, it's ultimately orienting. Like people reorient
Sure.
towards it, right? And it's ultimately transformative. It causes, this the deepest possible transformation from being egocentric to being profoundly reality-centric.
But does it care about you? That's the question. Does it care about you?
Why does that matter to you?
That's a question.
This is Jonathan Pageau. Welcome to the Symbolic World. So hello everyone. I am here with Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke. All of you know them very well. I am really excited and a little befuddled, and we're wondering what's going to happen because John Vervaeke wrote, both of us said, I watch your conversation together, and I really would like to have a discussion, the three of us. And so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what it is that he's scheming and what's going on in his mind. But before we start, we're making an announcement today. In a few weeks, we'll put the links in the description that you can go see on our website. But in a few weeks, John will be teaching a class on cognitive science and ritual for the symbolic world. And so he's going to go into his own ideas and his own research and all the way that he connects his study in cognitive science with ritual. And then in the last episode, he's gonna go through the theory, and then the last episode we'll have a discussion together. And so that will be, of course, live like the other classes. You can join live. You can also buy the class and watch it later if you don't have time to join live. But we'll have Q&As and everything the same way we're doing our other classes. So before we start, maybe John, you can give us a little something about the Cog Sci class.
Yeah. So I first of all deeply appreciative of being here. And also very appreciative of you inviting me to teach on the symbolic world. I'm very excited about this, especially the fact that it'll at least have a dialogical culmination. I think that's just wonderful. Goes with a lot of things that I believe in and stand for. So there's lots of theories of ritual out there, but there's very little theory of ritual that actually covers what you might call the cognitive dimension of ritual. So I'm not going to be offering, that would be pretentious and hubristic to say, I'm going to give you a comprehensive account of ritual. I mean, there's socioeconomic, there are historical, there are cultural, there are philosophical, there are theological aspects of ritual, and I'm not here to comment on them, and I'm not here to deny that they exist or that they're important. All I'm saying is there has been a missing dimension in a lot of the discussion of ritual, which is the cognition of ritual. Is ritual a way of knowing, for example? Is that a reasonable question to ask? And there's a lot of work on that, and I want to bring all the work I've done on the imaginal, the relationship between the imaginal and the rational and the reasonable, and the relationship, what it is, what kind of knowing are we talking about, and is there a rationality to ritual? Those are all the things we're going to be talking about. The quick answer is yes, there is cognition in ritual. ritual, and it's a very powerful and important form of ritual, and it's bound up very deeply with, I think, a more proper understanding of what we mean by rational. If what we mean by rational isn't merely logical, but being reasonable in a much more comprehensive sense.
All right. Well, we are definitely looking forward to that. So, Jordan, it's good to see you. And we want to know. I mean, I want to know what it is in our conversation, John, that sparked this discussion. So you have to start us off.
Well, first of all, because I'm going to do a few things that'll be provocative, but as is my want. But obviously, I'm not doing anything ridiculous like attempting a refutation. I loved the conversation. I love both of you. I consider you friends that I respect and have a lot of affection for. And so it was like, yeah, but what about this? What about this kind of issue? It wasn't like, well, I think you're. It's not that, okay? So, and I think it's fair to say there was a lot of John Vervaeke running through the conversation. So I don't want to be ungracious or anything like that. So I just want to frame very quickly where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to be Socratic. I'm not trying to be a skeptard. Okay, so I'll lay out what I heard, and of course you'll be free to correct me when I'm done. What I thought I heard around a central thing I want to talk about. We don't have to stick on that topic. This is just but this is what brought me into. I want to talk to you two about it, right? So there was a discussion of pistis as faith, and then there was very much moves I agree with, like moving it off belief, at least in the sense of asserting propositions without evidence or argument. You both said something along those lines, and then there was a movement to trust, and then I would have wanted to slow down a little bit there, because the problem with the word trust is it's very equivocal. There's two different meanings of trust. There's one meaning of trust is based on empirical, like observation and inference. I come to a conclusion about the probability of somebody's competence. So I trust that if I give this to Peter, he'll do a good job. That's not particularly relevant to your conversation in any important fashion, because that's just how we sort of get about the world, where we can't operate with certainty, which is like everywhere. Then you made so I just want to make clear that that's not what we're talking about, to my mind. And then you moved to something which was deeper. And I'm going to use a little bit of my own language, and we can play with it if you don't like it. But it was something like, because you were trying to draw, to my mind, you were trying to draw together notions of participatory knowing, because that was invoked a lot. And it's something like, participation in sort of primordial presuppositions. These are presuppositions that you can't get outside of. They are presupposed in the very act of trying to make sense, make judgments about what's intelligible, etc. And so they're primordial in that sense. To doubt them would be to invoke them to try and doubt them, kind of thing. And so although you can't give an argument for them, there is no place you can stand to call them seriously into question. And this is a good model, by the way. It's not unique to me or to both of you. Alvin Plantinga who's an important Christian philosopher, has a very similar kind of, a presupposition model of what's going on. And I'm a little bit different than him on this, but so that's cool. So far so good. I think everybody's nodding and smiling, so it's good. But then, so a couple issues came up to me. Well, one is, okay, that's fair, and for me, that's great, because that sort of grounds the philosophical Silk Road really wonderfully, because it means, that we're not all automatically, we can't dismiss faith. We're bound at this level. I think, Jordan, you even said, even the atheist has to have this kind of faith in some sense. You said something to that degree. And that's a great strength. But it also opens up this question. That means at that level of the argument, that both the Buddhist and the Christian have equal faith, because if they equally have, right, a set of primordial presuppositions that makes the world fundamentally intelligible to them in a way in which they can profoundly participate, they both have faith. This is why I think it's a philosophical Silk Road move. Now, what I then wonder, so again, that's how I'm posing it to you, it seems to me you need an additional argument for talking about faith in the specific Christian content, because that faith doesn't follow from the argument you gave, because the argument you gave is a properly pluralistic argument. Okay, now there's potential moves available to you, and I'll lay them out how I see them and what I find problematic about them, and then I'll stop talking. Okay, so one move you can make is to say something, well, like, I mean, well, Christianity makes the most sense or something like that. That's problematic. I'm not going to repeat my 1,000 arguments and publications and videos about intelligibility grounds and relevance realization. And relevance realization is properly pluralistic, right? You can't we just published a paper on this. You can't give there's no way to give an a priori formalization of relevance realization that allows you to say this is the optimal final version of relevance realization. Relevance realization is non-computational, to put it in a phrase. And that's really important because that grounds meaning in life, that grounds a lot of the stuff we're talking about, but that also commits you to certain consequences of that. Now, what you could do, and you could make use of James Filler. I'm talking to him tomorrow, by the way.
Nice.
And he's got a second book out coming where he's got the critique of substance ontology, so I'm looking forward to that. And then you could say, oh, well, what we could do is we could make a move where, you could say intelligibility or information are properly relational, and therefore we should go to a worldview. I'm trying to use a neutral term here, that gives the most proper place to relationality and doesn't commit to like a substance ontology or something like that. And then James, as you know, maps that into the Trinity. The Trinity is the most powerful symbol, according to James, of pure relationality, and therefore it's a great symbol for ultimate reality, and that's why it makes the most sense. And it seemed to me that arguments along those lines were being made. And, push back when I'm done, and we're here as friends. But then the concern that I had with that is, well, the problem with that is, and we'll see what James says about this. I have a critique of James, which is his main argument, to cut it short, and I won't make the argument, I'll just give you the conclusion, is you can't get relations out of relata. You can't, there's nothing, given, if you start with things and substances in the Aristotelian terms, you can't get relations out of that, and if you can't get relations, you can't get intelligibility, et cetera, et cetera. That's the core argument that he makes. The problem is there's an exactly symmetrical argument, and Jonathan will probably recognize this is a Neoplatonic argument. You also can't get relata out of pure relations. You can't get, the arguments are exactly symmetrical. So pure relationality doesn't mean at the bottom there's relations. Pure relationality means at the bottom there is that is below both relations and relata and makes them both possible. And of course this is the Neoplatonic one, right? It's not a relation, it's not a relata, it's what makes relations and relata possible. Or it's something like Zen Shunyata, which is, okay, now what does that mean for the mapping onto the Trinity? Because I could say, well, Zen does a really good job because Zen prioritizes non-duality, and that's the central message, not the Trinitarian nature of relationality. And this goes into the deeper argument. This is a mapping function. And the problem with mapping functions is that reality is combinatorially explosive, and there is no perfect map. What kind of map do you want? Do you want a contour map? Do you want a geographical map? Do you want a political map? Do you want a thermal map? It depends pragmatically on the goal you're trying to solve. So there is no way of saying that's the absolute best map of reality. It can't work. Now, you may think, and I'm going to use all these terms with deep respect, so I'm not being dismissive, okay? But you say, well, I can map Yahweh, the God of Israel, and Jesus of Nazareth and the Spirit of Pentecost, which I take to be at least one way of understanding the Trinity. There's a mapping going on there. And it's like, I think that's great. I think James's book is great. But the Neoplatonists have a way of mapping. And there's other maps. And there's no there's nowhere to stand to say this is the absolute right map. And so we keep coming back to a proper pluralism, for which I don't see why you come to a particular faith in, right, as opposed to just having, sorry, this sounds silly, having faith in faith itself. And I don't believe that. You obviously know that. But do you understand what the gist of the argument is? Because the reason why this matters, because it has existential import, because, and Jordan matters to me a lot, right? Jordan was talking about what led him into Christianity, not what led him into faith. And that's what I was trying to understand, right? So I think it's fair to me to bring up this set of problems. Okay, how is that? Was that okay?
I think I definitely understand the different arguments. I think Jordan, you should start.
Okay. I'm mindful of the concern, Jonathan, you mentioned earlier. Jonathan mentioned that he's concerned that when he and I talk, it may be maybe too abstract or too high level. And I think it's fair to say that when we added Vervaeke into the conversation, and where he's actually bringing a point that is very, very precise. So I think maybe the thing to do is say, forgive me. But there's nothing I can do about the fact that this may be at the borders of intelligibility. So let's see. Yes, this notion that there can be no map that is the funny, that is the ultimate map, is actually the same as the critique I have of metamodernism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the answer is something like, is there something that is more fundamental than mapping, that is primordial in the sense that it is prior to all possible maps, which is not itself defined as a map, but as a proto-map. And it's the process whereby maps are formed at all, and constrains and defines all possible maps. Mm-hmm. If such a thing we're able to enter into relationship with it, by the way, and also in point number 2, then that's the thing, right? That's the thing that we would ultimately have to be looking at. Okay, Roman numeral number 2. In this kind of a conversation, it's beautiful that all three of us are, this won't be controversial, but in this kind of a conversation, you have to be very particular about the fact that we cannot bias any particular quality of relationship, meaning in this specifically intelligence or semantics or cognition narrowly understood, but actually be saying what we're seeking to do is to enter into relationship with that thing which is primordial or prior to all possible maps, with the wholeness of our capacity to enter into relationship at all. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe then just to add that the third piece, and I really do think it was you who added this piece to a conversation we had years ago. Oh, yes. And I can say it in a way that's definitely yours, which is reciprocal opening.
Yes.
Meaning that this is also an alive relationship, that in entering into this quality of holistic relationship with this primordial, both we and our capacity to are in a continuous reciprocal opening. And so notice what's happening in all of this, right? So that is what I think Christianity is.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I'm like, there's two ways in which you could be meaning that. One is Christianity is that, and so is, and let's play fair. We're not going to compare good Christians to bad Buddhists or some silly. We're going to say the best of a Christian, the best of a Buddhist. We'll play fair. It seems to me that I can say everything you just said: the reciprocal opening, a transformative relationship to ultimate relationality, the one in Neoplatonism or Shunyata that makes all relationality possible. That is also available to the good faith Buddhist, the good faith Taoist, the good faith Neoplatonist. And of course, the trick here, of course, is Filler relies on Neoplatonism even to make his argument, right?
I'm going to pause for a moment because I feel like there's something has to happen at the level of dialogos for this to work properly.
Oh, I hope I'm not being stultifying. I'm not trying to be.
No, the opposite. I think that there's something like, to be able to respond to this properly, we have to come into a quality of communion that affords a vastly greater capacity than we have as individuals and have yet cultivated.
Good. I'm open to that. Like I said, I'm not here to refute things. That's not what I want. I want to get this. Because I want to look, what I don't see in the two of you. Maybe saying this will help to do what you're talking about, Jordan. I don't see a simplistic sort of liberal tolerance. And I mean that in a pejorative sense. Well, you have your Christianity and I have my Buddhism or what, and we all just live together and that's all wonderful, and a sort of relativism. And, I take it that's not what you're saying. Right. Good. So we're in agreement. And so I'm trying to say, tell me how you address these issues and yet keep the depth from just degenerating into, well, I like you and you like me and we like that we like each other and all that sort of stuff that really doesn't help with what's going on in the world right now.
So maybe while you're meditating, maybe I'll throw out the things that came to my mind when you were talking, John. So a few things came to my mind. One is, we've talked about this before. One is that the map that Christianity proposes is eschatological.
Yes.
And it's presented in a manner that is actually not a specific map, right? It's presented in with language that is mythological, that is structural, like a city with something which represents the top of the hierarchy, the Son of Man, a king figure, something which represents the bottom of the hierarchy, the sacrificed lamb, which are joined together as the light of the city. And then that gives way to a world where there's balance between the natural world and the human world, and the artificial world and the human world, and that all multiplicity can bring its quality into that participation, right? So all the kings bring their crown into the city, and so I think that is a one way of answering the question of the absolute map, or like the perfect map, is that the perfect map is given as something which is coming but never comes, or at least doesn't come in the way that we think. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't an eschatological moment, but that eschatological moment cannot be measured by the measurements of time that we give to time now. Like, it's the end of time in the sense that it's the purpose of time. It's the end of history in the sense that it's the thing toward which all things are moving. And I think that in terms of, let's say, a map, like if we talk about the idea of mapping reality, I think that that's important to always remember, is that Christ is the one who came and the one who's coming. And when he's coming, in the end, that which he will offer is a new heaven and a new earth that is not the one that we have now. Everything that we have now is, although we don't want to say that it's arbitrary, it's not arbitrary at all, but it's a glimmer. It's always a glimmer and a kind of small participation in something which is coming. And there are sometimes you can read, there are mysterious ways in which, for example, like the saints will talk about, when you take communion, you are already in the eschaton, you're right, but it's something which, when you're in the eschaton, you're also not in regular time. You're not in the normal time. You're not in the way that the world is laid out. And coming back from that, in some ways, will always relativize and make things imperfect and and somewhat off from the. And so I think that in terms of the idea of the idea that Christianity offers a map for reality, I think we always have to remember that eschatology is a central part of how we understand that, how the logos manifests himself in the world. Because the logos is, the fullness of the logos has not yet been seen. The fullness of the logos is coming. It's over the hill. It's come, Lord Jesus, right? This sense that we're calling it into being, but it never it doesn't arrive in the way that we expect it, right? Even in the book of, even Christ says, if you say here he is, don't listen to those who say there he is. Like that's not how it's going to happen. Um, so in terms of mapping, that's one of the things I want to offer. And the other part, though, I want to offer in terms of relationality, in terms of the Trinity, is we always have to remember that the Trinity is not just relationality; it is one.
Yes, of course.
Right. You always have to keep that aporia present for it to be the so it's both the one in some ways of the Neoplatonist, but it also is the fullness of relationality in the multiple, right? So it's those two things at the same time. It avoids the problem of Gnosticism and right the problem of the degenerate manifestations, you could say, right? That manifestations or things that proceed from the one are immediately degenerate for that reason. Anyway, so those are a few things I wanted to offer, but it's mostly Jordan. You have to. I think you're the. A lot of it was about the things that you said. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, when you said about the logos. So what I was noticing was perhaps the crux, precisely. The key
nice pun.
Yeah. Is known as the hypostatic union. Because the logos incarnate affords a different quality of relationality than the logos in general. Yeah? So if I'm Lao Tzu, endeavoring deeply to come into relationship with the way, there's so far I can go. If I'm a Neoplatonist contemplating the one, there's so far I can go. But John, not you, the Apostle John, actually meets Jesus. And that's a completely different kind of thing. It's very different. It's as similar as saying my ability to know my wife by virtue of reading her biography and by virtue of actually loving her directly. And so the ability to actually enter into a human scale relationship with the Logos incarnate is a qualitatively different kind of thing. And I think there's a lot going on there. And it's the inverse, and a very powerfully bound inverse of then the crucifixion. And these things are yoked together powerfully. I was also, Jonathan, mindful of the talk you gave at the Symbolic World Conference on the Son of Man. Mm-hmm. I was seeing whatever images were coming to me when you were talking then, I was seeing those images coming up when John was speaking earlier. So, ultimately what we're really talking about is Christ. And ultimately we're really talking about, obviously, in some sense, the thing that differentiates Christianity as a way of doing this sort of thing is Christ. And Christ is the incarnation. The actual, not just the logos as an abstraction that we can contemplate, which the Greeks do at the highest level, and Lao Tzu does at the highest level, the way, the logos, but the fact that there's something about the particularity of the eruption of the eternal into the chronological in a particular moment in space and time, and what that does in terms of affording our ability, as in fact quite distinctly finite beings, right, with a very limited capacity to enter into relationship with the ultimate, in terms of affording that, what would be called the hypostatic union, right? This paradoxical aporia that happens at that level of how the finite and the infinite can actually grow in that relationality.
I want to properly pause here in case either one of you want to say some more, because that was a lot. And it was good, and it was rich. The eschatological, the map is incomplete. That is, of course, also not unique to Christianity. Buddhism has Maitreya, the coming Buddha, and there is no map. So the eschatological sense is, again, found elsewhere. That's just one example. I can give others. Although I think I hear an argument building. Yeah, all these things are found elsewhere, but you can only find all of them in sort of your one-stop enlightenment shop or something that's Christianity. But maybe that's the argument that's building here. We'll see if that's what we're working towards. Now, the idea that the Logos is incarnate in a specific historical person, Well, Buddha nature was present in Siddhartha Gautama, and people met him historically, and that's how Buddhism was founded. And so that's not the Christian doctrine of incarnation, but that's not playing fair. You can't say the Buddhists don't have they have that the Dharma was embodied in a way, right, that ignited a religion, right, and so again, that would be the case. Jonathan, I agree with you about the rejection of Gnosticism and many versions of Neoplatonism, but as Filler himself argues, if you properly understand Neoplatonism, it doesn't have the one and the relationality are always held together in the notion of ultimate reality. It's not the one and relationality, and because it's not a numerical one and it's not a substantial one. It's the oneness of intelligibility in that sense. So now you may say, but what I have. Oh, I want to do this very carefully. You might be saying that, but in some sense, you both feel. That's the wrong word. Sorry. You both sense that you have had this personal relationship with Jesus, and I'm not saying that in a dismissive fashion. You understand that, please? Okay. Is that what this is coming down to, ultimately? Because
it really depends what you mean by that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Because I've heard versions of that I wouldn't identify with. Let's just say.
Well, let me help you there, because here's ways in which it doesn't work for me. Because people will say, I feel the presence of Jesus and he's telling me to do X. And then this person over here says, I feel the presence of Jesus and he's telling me to do not X. And it's like, oh, really? Oh, this makes no sense to me whatsoever. Like that kind of stuff isn't going to track as an argument because it just doesn't line up with the facts. Okay? So
go ahead, George.
Yeah, so I don't know this about you, Jonathan, but I imagine... for example, when you have an actual experience of profound grief, utterly shattering, right? Well beyond maps, right? Beyond any notion, deeper than your faith, a grief deeper than your faith, and you notice that there's something there. Right? You're not alone in that grief. There's nothing else that you can imagine, right? You're beyond mind. You're definitely beyond meditation. And as you enter into that, you notice that something has qualities. And a way of naming those qualities is love. Right? So that would be an example of what that means. Like when you really, really, really go to the experience of a profound relationship with how loss works. And the shattering of your ability to enter into identity at all. You notice that non-duality is not the actual thing that's at the bottom. That there's something more fundamental than that. And the only way we can talk about it would be the thing that is called love. The same thing happens, by the way, from my point of view, if you go all the way to the highest level. But that's a little bit trickier in my experience.
So can you say that last thing? Because so first of all, thank you for that. That's a powerful and rich thing to say. So I'm not. You're aware that it's deeper than non-duality. You're invoking spatial metaphors, which of course are transcended by non-duality. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to get at what that. So I might have a sense of what you're talking about. People talk about a sensed presence, which is neither objective nor subjective, neither emanating nor emergent, but deeper, and that you don't know it by other than participating it and being it. But I don't mean in a logical identity sense. like when you're deeply in love with somebody in an agapic way.
Mm.
Is that what you mean? Again, I'm not trying to do a judo move on you. I'm trying to understand.
No, I get it. I mean, think about what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
Talking
yeah.
about doing neurosurgery, which is perfect, right? This is where we are, by the way. I mean, we meaning the species, right? Where the species is actually here. We got to get this shit figured out. There's no more knocking around, beating around the bush. We have to take the level of care and precision and actual embodied love and clarity that's necessary. So let's see. Oh man, yeah. What I noticed is that. Oh, okay, nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say something, and it's actually going to be trite.
Okay.
But it's the best thing I can get out of my mouth right now, and an endeavor to
Okay.
collaboratively get there.
I'll take it charitably, Jordan. I promise. I'll take it charitably.
And by the way, I'm going to reinforce this. This has to be 3. So,
Yeah.
John, you're participating. So if we go towards the direction of joy, so joy and grief being gates to this relationship, what we notice when we get to profound levels of joy is a feeling of the presence of the infinite, like a proximity towards something which is of the nature of the transcendent, yet in the realm of the immanent. Right? Something that we are able to experience, but is increasingly accelerating beyond anything that could actually be present or contained within experience, within the finite. Right? So we accelerate in that direction. And as we move in that direction, what we begin to notice is that we do not actually dissolve into that, but rather are embraced by it. Right? And that's the key, or the key difference, is that the relationship between the infinite and the finite is not a mistake. There's nothing about the way that creation is that is not good. And that there's the ability for us to be in a relationship that is governed by that as a fundamental is, how do I say? Golly, I can't. It's not my words. Somebody else has to say it.
Well, I think that the thing that comes to me when you're saying what you're saying is that that Christianity, I believe Christianity really does, in its highest instantiations, really does have a sense that the source of reality is non-dual, right? That the way that we describe God as a Trinity is a way to describe the infinite, right? Not a way, but it's a manifestation of the infinite in a type of aporia that joins unity and multiplicity together. Saint Maximus says things like, God is being and non-being.
Yeah, exactly.
That type of language. Now, I think what Jordan is bringing up, which I think is really important in the vision of Christianity, is that Christianity deeply understands that non-dual is not a vortex that swallows the world into it, right? That's not something that wants to call you out of being, that wants to call you out of reality into some like infinite bliss or whatever. That in fact what it does is that it affords all of reality in it, but in a specific way, right? There's a specific manner in which it makes the world exist, and that way it is surprising at the outset, because that in that way is something like self-sacrificial love.
Yeah.
And that the self-sacrificial love is the mode of existence. And so Christ manifests that in the extreme. He manifests that in the, in a way that is kind of almost unbearable to watch, but it becomes an image of how it is that we can participate in non-duality without escaping the world. We're not escaping our desires. We're not escaping our bodies. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're not denying any of the goodness of the world. And what that looks like is that image. I think it's that image that I mentioned in Revelation, which is the king and the sacrifice together, right? The highest and the lowest joined together, and one of them affording the other, right? The reason why Christ is king is because he was on the cross, and and vice versa. That image of Jesus on the cross with the sign above that says the king. This is the king, folks. And I think that all of Christianity is about that. And that's why everything that Christians argue in the first centuries about the nature of Christ, about preserving his divinity, preserving his humanity, all of these questions are about the way in which the transcendent is actually that which makes the immanent exist. And that's the balance that Christianity brings about. Now, I don't know if there are other, I'm not an expert on all world religions. I don't know if there are other forms that have that, that anchor, right? That hold. What I see in many other religions is a tendency to emphasize the escape. Right. Like we have to, and Christians, by the way, fall in that all the time. Like Christians actually will tend to say things, die and go to heaven, like that kind of language. It's actually profoundly not Christian. It's such a habit that humans have to want that. But when you look at even the Bible, or if you look at the way that the fathers talk about Christianity, it's not at all that type of. It isn't that escape, right? It's like the kingdom of heaven is not the same as heaven. It's that joining together, right?
Yeah. So again, I'm actually going to be playing with like wooden knives right now, but you're going to get there. I think this might get there. So, an invitation to break the wheel of karma, a vow not to leave the wheel of karma until every other conscious being, sentient being has done so. Sentient being. Compared to an invitation to get on your cross. That the proper orientation of the transcendent with the immanent is to pour itself into it. To actually so utterly love creation. This is it. So it's the key is like, man, Christians get this wrong all the time.
By the way, can I just interject in one phrase? I respect the fact that you're demonstrating genuine reasonableness of entering into self-criticism. So I just wanted to appreciate that. So please go ahead.
Yes, I think actually in some sense you may be speaking for the comments as well. Everybody, John just said this is genuine reasonableness, not just incompetence. Okay, let's see. So it's almost like the reverse direction. This notion of escape versus immerse, right? The call is not to alleviate suffering. Right? The call is actually to recognize that the world is so rich that suffering is intrinsic and meaningful, something like that. Right? That God, the actual transcendent, Buddha nature, but in this case, comes into reality and lives directly with other people and suffers. In fact, not just suffers, but allows himself to take on the fullness of suffering. Not to have us escape it, but to remind us that that's actually the thing.
Okay.
Right? We are not. It's not like, oh man, suffering was an error. Tell you what, guys, I'll give you a suffering Band-Aid so nobody ever suffers anymore. That's not the thing. It's rather, no, the way this thing is supposed to work is you're descending into a deeper and deeper capacity to suffer, because that's what engagement with reality actually is to undergo, right? To undergo reality, experience, and to grow and to mature. And so instead of dying and escaping, what happens is you die and you enter into even deeper capacity to enter into a relationship with a large and ever expanding reality. And this, again, this is the opposite of a naive notion of non-duality, which is an elimination of difference, right?
Right.
It's actually, no. It's an embracing of difference in a deeper wholeness that produces a deeper capacity for differentiation in an ongoing unfolding.
Okay, this was really good. None of these compliments I'm giving you are facetious. So I'm trying to put a couple things together. You got this is like an extended version of the reciprocal opening, what you just did, Jordan. So you're acknowledging that. That's good.
Yep.
And I take it that that's what you mean by joy. The problem with when people hear joy is they think intense pleasure, and that's not what we're talking about here. And of course, you can forgive them for that because we have this stupid word enjoyment, which just means intense pleasure. Which really messes people up. Okay, so we've got that, and we've got the idea that this reciprocal opening can be Jonathan was pointing to, like there's a universal temptation to misconstrue the reciprocal opening as escape. Rather, it's an entering into deeper and deeper relation, right? And that's properly agapic, right? Because it's anagogic, agapic together. Is that landing?
Yeah.
Fairly?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the idea here is that what Christianity offers is an alternative in which ontonormativity, being as fundamentally good, not ethically good or aesthetically good or even epistemically good, right? Beyond the true and the good and the beautiful, it's just being is good in this ontological sense, and that's what I heard you saying in some sense. Is that fair? Like you're getting a sort of a reading of Genesis. God looks at the world as good. Right? And he's not making a moral judgment. He's not making an aesthetic judgment. He's not making an epistemic judgment because he's God, right? So he's saying something else. He's saying that being is intrinsically good qua being. Just by being, it is good. So that's why escape is fundamentally wrong. Because if being is intrinsically good, seeking to escape from it is intrinsically wrong. Am I getting your argument correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's interesting too about, for example, Christian theosis, like the notion of Christian theosis is, I remember when I was first interested in Orthodox theology and I had read a lot of esoteric texts from other traditions, there was something about Christian theosis which annoyed me because it was like, it wasn't the full thing. It wasn't like the complete, absolute, ecstatic, elimination of me. And then after that, I realized, well, actually, no, wait a minute. I think that all things are good. And so, right, St. Maximus says that we become God to the extent that that's possible. That's just the phrases he uses. Is what he means is in something like we become God to the extent that the world that you continue to exist, that you continue because your being is good is good. It has a goodness. You don't want to completely snuff out the particularity that God has put in the world. And so, and it's when I kind of understood that I realized that the image of theosis that Christianity presents is something like the fullness of all things, right? So all things are mirrored, are these reflections of God, and that is the fullness. That is the fullness, like that is more full in a very mysterious way. I don't know how to say it metaphysically, but that is more full than just the non-dual God, right? Just the God that transcends all things. That God that transcends all things, creating the world in love, so that it becomes a transparent reflection of himself in a way that doesn't destroy any of that particular, but rather, gathers it in love, in multiplicity and unity. That's a bigger vision, actually, than being a drop that goes back to Brahma.
I'm not here. I'm not trying to defend Vedanta.
No. I don't want you to defend Vedanta. I'm just using examples to say why I think, even my own process of kind of seeing what was precious about.
I think this is good, by the way. I think you're making I mean it again. I think I think we're getting into dialogos. I feel like these are good answers that are provoking me in a Socratic way. I feel that, and I just want to share that. It's happening for me. Okay, so I that's good. So now, can I in that spirit, there's two things here. So, I mean, this issue has been broached in some very deep interreligious, I should say, but also interpersonal dialogue, which goes on to dialogos. There's Cobb's book, a dialogue, a Buddhist and Christian dialogue that is mutually transformative. And then, even more importantly, the anthology around the work of Maso Abe, which Christians and Jews and others replied to, in which he said, it's called Emptying God, in which he said, well, what we're ultimately talking about here is kenosis, right? And he basically says, well, doesn't kenosis ultimately require, right, the emptying of emptiness itself, this Zen notion? And he says, I don't see Christianity getting to that in some way. And a way of making this perhaps a little bit more concrete, as Jonathan, as Jordan keeps calling us back to, is, I get what you're saying. How do you make sure this isn't just a crypto-egoism, which is I don't want to cease to exist, and that's why this is so good.
But think about what it looks like in practice. What it looks like in practice is I am constantly trying to cease to exist. That's in the sense that Christianity, the idea of kenosis and of self-emptying.
Yeah. Keep going.
The way
Keep going.
that Christianity functions is like humility, self-sacrifice, of giving yourself in love, and the surprise, or the surprise really that's the actual anchor of being. That's the actual anchor of how you exist. And the resurrection in the end. What is resurrected is all my gestures of self-sacrifice are resurrected into me, but me obviously in a mysterious way, in a mysterious. So there is something. Everything about Christianity is this kenosis. Without understanding that, you can't understand any of it. Like why do we have martyrs? Good. Why do we have all these things? Like it's like everything about it is this emptying that brings fullness.
Okay, so you're saying something really good, and I want to push on it because I believe you're not making a performative contradiction. A performative contradiction is when you're making a claim that undermines your ability to make the claim, right? If I was to say, right now I am completely unconscious.
Yeah.
No, I have to be, right, a performative. And I agree with Whitehead that performative contradictions are much more important than, right, propositional contradictions. Yeah. Okay, so good. So one way it sounds like you're doing is you sound like saying, well, I'm pursuing this because, right, I think dissolving or disappearing is really good. And then what I'm trying to do is I follow this is to try to dissolve and disappear. And that sounds like, well, no, like, who are you to make that, like, do you see why there's a bind there, right? Yeah. And you were pushing up against that. I want to give you space because I agree with what you just said. I think we're really, again, good dialogos. We're really moving into the heart of this. This really hangs on kenosis, and obviously agape, but right, it hangs on it in a really, really crucial manner. Okay, so I'm presenting this as a bit of a paper tiger. I hope for you. It's like, oh, you're not saying that, but say why you're not saying that more. Okay.
Well, so. St. Paul, St. Paul has this image where he says it's not I that live, but Christ that lives in me. And it's a beautiful sentence because it captures the paradox, which he's not actually saying I don't exist anymore. No, he's saying it's Christ that lives in me, and so he's affirming himself to the extent that he is a manifestation of the logos, and that is what is left. Now the way to go to get there is to shed, right? To shed a lot of the things my passions, the things that I care about, but that ultimately, once you do that, and you can experience it fractally. It's not like I'm going to get to the end of it and all of a sudden I'm going to realize, I've been self-sacrificing this whole time, and so now finally it's like you see it happening nonstop, which is that when you enter into a loving relationship with someone and you let go of your just proper desires and all the things that you want, and you kind of cede way to that, then you realize that it brings the person, you and them together, and what comes out of it is more than what was there before. And so you're like, oh, wait a minute. It's not like this one thing that I'm doing. Like, I'm stacking all my good work so that when I die, then
No,
you're
no,
like,
yeah,
you know
yeah.
what I mean? It's like, no, I'm noticing it happen
Mhm,
every
mhm,
day,
mhm.
every time that I enter into that mode of being where I'm not holding on and I'm not grasping. Then what happens is I see more come out of it, and I see more of myself. Like I see more of who I truly am. Right? To say,
Yeah. So you're saying this. First of all, I hear a couple things here. There's the realization that the self is inherently dialogical, not a monad, a self-isolated thing, but it exists dialogically, because that your argument, I think, depends on that. Secondly, you're invoking reciprocal opening again, and you're saying if you put those two together, the self is dialogical and reciprocal opening, you can move from being egocentric to reality-centric, but that doesn't feel like a loss, that feels like a gain. Is that okay so far?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd say that like that.
Okay, really good. This is very good. So, is it fair to say? I'm not trying to be deductive. I'm trying to be dialogical. So I'm not trying to be reductive. But is this is this the grounding of your faith? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Again, I'm not talking about propositions being derived from more deeper propositions. We've gone through this thing about how do you get the particularity of your Christian faith. Is this, in that sense, please be fair to me, in that sense, is this the grounding of your Christian faith, the way I just described it?
Okay, so I'm going to say it back to you with a
Yes.
slightly different way, but I think I heard you. So all three of us happen to be fathers. We have
Yes.
children. And we have the first person experience, therefore, of the kenosis that is intrinsic in parenting, all the way down to the color of the hair in your beard. And
Yeah. And the loss of your life, you lose years for every child.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And to the unique qualities of possibility, of joy, that are exclusively possible in this creative act, gated or mediated simultaneously by both the kenosis and the communion, and the unparalleled degree of new qualities of grief that are available also in this experience. And in the recognition in yourself that both in spite of and because of the aforementioned, it is incomprehensible that you could be even vaguely who you are absent that.
Right. 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 Right.
That's probably the closest to the grounding of my faith that I can get to. I have a
And you,
process where I go, oh, right. If my grief at the suffering of my children is X, how much greater is God's grief at the suffering of all of creation? And I can
Right.
notice that there's something about these connections where I can have a sense of real empathy down and suddenly have a really weird sense of empathy up. I get it. I get it now. I get you, God, in a weird way, because I get my dad. Oh, my actual dad, which I didn't get before. When my kids do something like, oh, I get it. I get what was going on in the experience of a being who loves me from the outside, like from before I existed, and understands me in a certain context. And then through that line, there's a way of having a quality of relationship with the Abba. And so that, like the rightness of that, the way that actually develops, and the way that grounds everything else. And by the way, in this also philosophically and metaphysically, I would say that's probably the ground of my faith.
so I heard you saying, I want to put two grounds together, if you'll prevent me from, I hope I'm not grinding things. So there was this one, which is the ontonormativity, the goodness of being, and therefore any attempt, and I'm picking up on Jonathan here, any attempt to escape is ultimately misguided. And then I'm fulfilling that commitment to ontonormativity, entering into reciprocal opening, deeper relationship with the goodness of being. And the best way I experience that is in the kenosis, understood as agape, because of course parental love is the metaphor, the paradigmatic example of agapic love, and Christianity captures that. Sorry, I don't have the right verb here, but just let me use that word. Captures that very well for you. Is that? Did I say it back to you in a way that lands?
Well, the captures part is not quite right. So yeah, it's right with that.
Yeah. I don't like it, but something like that. Yeah.
It's more like strengthened, clarified.
Yeah. Okay. Affords, makes possible,
and supports. So affords is pretty
and
good,
support.
right? Because
Affords.
it both pattern matches, but more than pattern matching, provides a model, and more than modeling, provides the embodied body of the church. Right? An actual living incarnation of the thing that the model is conveying that is real, in the sense that all the things that I know in my deepest wisdom are the right ways to be in relationship with other people are lived in the community of my church.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for this. You're both being very charitable to me, and I appreciate that. I do think there are versions of Buddhism that are committed deeply to non-escape. Zen is a clear example of that. The idea of nirvana as escape is explicitly, completely, repeatedly rejected. And there is the self-emptying aspect in relationship to that. And then there is it's not I who live, but the Buddha nature that lives in me. All of these, if you'll allow me, and I'm searching for words. All of these functions, I'm trying to use a neutral term, are found there equally well. Now, I'm not saying they're found equally well in all religions. I'm not saying that. Okay. You're doing what I'm asking you to do. You're showing me why this doesn't degenerate into a liberal toleration kind of thing, right? So, what would you?
Well, does
Go ahead.
does Zen, let's say, formulate the infinite as relational to the finite?
Yes.
And so we can enter into
emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. Exactly. Explicitly.
Mm-hmm. So I know this is going to sound weird, but then why don't people pray in Zen?
They do. So I happen to know a Zen Roshi, and he prays and he chants, and so forth.
What's the infinite like? Does it have a sense of humor?
I'm sorry, Jordan. You're going to have to be more precise in what you mean by that question.
Well, one of the things of something that has a character of relationship is that it has a character of relationship, and so the question is something like,
well, okay. Let me answer that first. Okay. So this is Schellenberg, who's an atheist, but he says what we're talking about sacred is. It's ultimately real, and again, not in the neutral sense, in the ontonormative. I want to participate in it, so that's a relationship term. I want to participate in it. I want to conform to it. I want to reciprocally open. I want to be realized by it as I realize it. All of that. Secondly, it's ultimately orienting, like people reorient towards it, right? And it's ultimately transformative. It causes this the deepest possible transformation from being egocentric to being profoundly reality-centric.
But does it care about you? That's the question. Does it care about you?
Why does that matter to you?
That's a question. It might matter a lot, but it's definitely a question.
Well, so here's okay. Let's do that. I mean,
I'm basically trying to do what are the dots and see where the patterns match, and if they're isomorphic, they're isomorphic. And this ends up being something that may not be isomorphic, and then we can talk about it.
Right. Okay. So the concern there is, I'm going to try and speak on behalf of a Zen person. That's a little bit tricky, but
speak on behalf of the Buddha specifically.
Oh yeah. John will now be the Buddha, the Tathagata, right? My concern, and I mean, this is not a concern that's weird. A lot of Christian theology has been responding to this concern, which is the ontotheological critique The problem when you start saying it cares for me, or he cares for me, is it sounds like you're turning God into a person, and persons are prototypical Aristotelian substances. In fact, that's Aristotle's primary example of what a substance is, a person, which I don't think is a good translation of hypostasis, by the way. And it's like, that seems to me to be making a category mistake. If ultimate reality, I'm going to let you use the word God for what you're talking about, right? Because we're trying to see if the two meet. If ultimate reality is pure relationality in this non-escapist form of non-duality, that seems to preclude it from being any kind of thing.
So I mean, you could. I mean, I think we're using analogies here, but obviously, it's hard to talk about this.
Yes, it is. It is.
So I think the way to understand Jordan's question, which is perfectly legitimate from a Christian standpoint, because we say God loves me, right? And so
yeah, but I don't love my child because they love me. That's not agape. I love God. Spinoza. No, right? You shouldn't. If you genuinely love God,
then is there a sense of that relationship with the infinite? Like, is there a sense that
they love it? They love shunyata. If that's what you're asking.
The question is, does shunyata love them?
Why do you want that? You're agapic. You don't want what you love to love you back.
No, I'm not saying what you want. I'm saying
if I'm looking for the ultimate, then I need to have the totality of all possible relationality contained within the ultimate. And an ultimate that does not contain the affordance for loving John, literally logically is less than one that does. So that's it.
No, because you're engaging to what sounds to my mind like a performative contradiction. You're invoking ultimate relationality and then pinning it to the existence of a specific subject that is capable of a predicate, namely loving John.
Okay, good. No. So that's perfect. Okay. So let's call it this is the Aristotelian error.
Okay, right. I like that name. Yeah. I don't like Aristotle, so go ahead.
John going all out here.
Yeah. So what I mean is I don't like the standard reading of Aristotle that's got taken up in modern philosophy.
Yeah, so this notion that, how do we say it right? For God to love you, God must be a person in the sense of a substance. It's not right.
Yes, we agree on that then.
And so for love to unfold the infinite qualities that are intrinsic to the nature of love, it must include within itself the quality of loving John. In fact, loving all of John's selves and all the John's quantum states, right? But John specifically is the example we're using right now. And any version of love.
All my quantum states, I love that.
Hey, the infinite is really big. That's
actually the infinite is not really big. The infinite's not really big. Cantor was going to jump all over you for that one, but go ahead.
And so any way of endeavoring to how do you say it? Any ontological that's not right either.
Yeah, this is hard, and I understand that I'm pushing you both really hard, but you're being very kind to me.
I don't know about John, but I've been doing a Monday, Wednesday fast. And so, Wednesday, Friday fast.
Are you doing strict fast?
So, I'm sorry, Jordan.
And I thought, am I going to break fast? So I'm ready to go with John on this.
You don't have to do a strict fast. Nobody's forcing you to do a strict.
Actually, being faint is probably perfect. The perfect state.
Yeah.
In my weakness, his strength is
there you go. Exactly.
Jordan, can I say one thing that might be helpful? Not because I think it's full agreement, but it might close the distance and give you something to work with. I feel welcomed, enveloped, afforded by agape, by logos, right? But I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't want to create the sentence, agape logos loves me, even though it's analogous to what it's like when somebody's loving me. Are you saying that? Because Spinoza's fine with that too. The same love by which I love God is how God loves himself. And the love by which God loves me is the same love that I have for reality. That's that kind of thing.
No. What I'm saying is that the totality of all possible ways of entering into the relationship of love, including the ones that you have with your son, but not limited to, and much more, is contained in love, which is the name of God.
Right. But so again, I tried to say something, and this is a little bit trite. It's something like saying, like, and to be fair to me, Nicholas of Cusa says this: love loves, and love is one with the beloved. He gets the Trinity out of love. Mm-hmm. There's love, there's the beloved, and there's the loving, right? But he says there's ultimately just love, and you shouldn't think of it as loving, although you can talk that way. So I'm quoting a Christian here, by the way. I'm not trying to impose something from the outside. Like I said, I don't have any problem with the idea that I said it a long time ago when I talked about agape. Agape precedes me. It'll be after me. It is through me, and I am totally indebted to it. And therefore, I feel gratitude and gratefulness. And of course, I mean logos as well as agape. And for me, that's what it's like that's what I hear when people say I'm being loved by God.
So what about something like intimacy? Oh, sorry, quick. I got to do a rule check. So I got to go to our resident ortho bro, because I don't know this stuff. Was Nicholas of Cusa a heretic?
No. I think, is he a heretic in the Orthodox Church? It's irrelevant. What date is Nicholas of Cusa?
He's in the 1500s?
Yeah, so it's irrelevant. It's like we don't talk about that because they're all heretics.
They're all heretics. Okay, good. So we can just throw them out with. No, I'm kidding.
He's not a heretic in the Catholic Church,
which means
unlike Eckhart, none of his propositions were considered heretical either. Yeah.
And Eckhart, we don't know which proposition were questions. Like, Eckhart has been pretty much
exonerated.
Exonerated at this point because we don't. His statements are probably the places that were questionable are probably not in his writings anymore. Anyways, we don't know what they were.
Yeah. So the topic that maybe I would put on there, and maybe even leave it there for the moment, is that there's this notion of the concept of intimacy, or the quality of intimacy, that must be present. And again, I'm just sticking here to straight logic. If it exists at all in reality, then it must be an expression of that which is the ultimate. And the question is that actually part of this, of the infinite or the one or the ultimate? If you have a relationship of intimacy, and intimacy is reciprocal in nature.
Yeah.
You're vulnerable, yes, but there's also something like a reciprocal. Vulnerability. Again, back to the fact that Christ incarnated and actually died on a cross, right? For a variety of different reasons. But part of that is actually there's a reciprocity of relationality here. You're actually entering into a quality where, and by the way, an actual person, which is important, right? That the quality of personhood does not define God, but is a part of something that God is actually expressing. And I agree with you, of course, that hypostasis is deeper than personae. So that's, I think, a question that's probably worth circling around, is this very precise point of what is the essence of the quality of the relationship of love, and where does it sit in the larger kind of cosmologies and theologies?
I just want to say something also about the idea that God loves us. The way, I think the best way to also understand that is the way this reciprocal reciprocity that we have, that Christ says, love God and love your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And that's also how God loves you, right? It's similar to what you were referring to before, John. In Dante, you see it very beautifully. We're actually doing a class on Dante right now. And the sense that God, the people that come into your life with love, that you enter into a loving relationship with, they are the call to love God. They are in some ways the
Mm,
draw. They're
mm,
drawing you into the love of God by their love, right? You have this beautiful image in the comedy where basically it doesn't even say that God called, like, because it's too high, but there's a sense in which, the mother of God, the Virgin Mary, calls upon Dante's patron saint, who then calls upon Beatrice, who then Beatrice then goes and gets Virgil, and now
yeah,
Virgil comes to
yeah, yeah,
encounter Dante, and so you have this chain of love which moved up, right, the ontological ladder into God's love, which is pulling all these things into him. And so, we can experience sometimes glimmers of directly God's love, but to say God loves us is the same thing as to state that the world is good, right? It's
Hmm.
the same thing. It's to say that all these aspects of reality are a, a piece of the ladder. They're an aspect of, not in a utilitarian way, but they're a ladder
yeah.
into God. They're a step. There's something which is possibly revealing God to me at this moment. And if I can be in the right posture, then I can climb that ladder. I can see through the love of those around me, through all of this that's pulling me into God. And the mysterious, the hardest part of it, and the most mysterious part of it, is that sometimes when the love of those around me is evacuated, where I actually encounter hostility, that also becomes a ladder for the love of God to pull me into him, because it's as if now it's a more direct, I can have access to a more direct relationship with God, even when when Christ says, blessed are those that are persecuted for my sake. That there's both of those are ways in which we can have this experience of the way that God loves us, both through the hierarchy of love of all the others, but then also when we are attacked, and for wrong reasons, and for the name of Christ, you could say, and then all of a sudden the love of Christ will also pull us into Him. And if you haven't experienced it, obviously it's hard to describe, but it's something that you definitely do experience.
Hmm.
So those two things, Jordan's point about intimacy and what you just said, seem to go really well together in my mind, um, and I understand intimacy as the affordance of reciprocal opening. So I have intimacy if I can indwell somebody, and then they can indwell me. A deep, profound participatory knowing, and then that affords reciprocal opening. Um, and again, I think I can have that kind of intimacy with what we've already agreed, with ontonormativity, which is really real, and I love it because it's really real, and I do experience it in like Jonathan said, in logos agape, horizontally with other people, and upwardly and downwardly into the depths and up ontologically. All of that is the case. I, but like I say, and maybe this is me, but I find that I don't deny that I can, whatever everything I can resonate with that in Christianity. Jonathan, I was there in the gospel seminar, and I made that clear. But right, I also have that in the depths of Buddhism, Zen, especially the depths of Neoplatonism, and again, and maybe this is ultimately, maybe we're pushing on something that is maybe something that we can't ultimately get out into a formal thing, right? And I may be, I may be asking for something that I can't ultimately get. But what I hope I've offered is a way of explicating a lot more what you were saying, Jordan. And this is I think this is a much better answer, if you'll allow me, to Jim, than the one that you were trying to work out. Because I think that's as a friend, because I think this is the kind of thing that is the way you try to persuade people why you're a Christian in a way that I think is profoundly has a potential to be what I hope you think it is or want it to be, which is profoundly calling to them, rather than right. Do you know what I mean? It's like we went down this, and there was like. I thought this was really good. I thought this was genuine, and I'm not trying to escape now or anything like that. but do you understand what I'm saying? I like there could be a point where we're looking for a difference that we can't, that's ineffable. That like because I keep saying yes, I have that, right, and not trivially so, because I'll say this and you'll go yes, that makes sense, right, but I'm not trying to be reductive either. Sorry, now you can see that I'm running out because I'm starting to go into aporia. So I'll stop and let you two respond to what I just said.
Well, it's interesting. So what I noticed was that I definitely don't want to persuade anybody. I don't necessarily even want to call anybody, which is weird because I know that's, I think, what you're supposed to do, but whatever.
Yeah, it is kind of.
All I want to do is tell the truth, and all I want to do is follow as best I can the model that Christ laid down for us, and to the degree to which the Spirit puts something for me to do it with as much skill as I can, which is not much. Because I don't, it's critical. I don't understand. I definitely know that it's the weird thing. It's like the invert, that Socrates thing. I am quite certain that I don't understand how any of this works. And that anything that I might try to do is definitely a bad idea in a very particular kind of way. And so I'm really glad that you asked us to have this conversation. I had a very distinct sense that this is, it will rile a bunch of people up, but, as you said, though, what was it called? Persecuted in his sake, in his name. But I feel like what we did was useful in a big way. And good, very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is, if you'll allow me, I'm trying to, and I'm showing up in good faith. So this wasn't instrumental or anything. I have affection. I showed up in good faith. But this is the philosophical Silk Road. I'm trying to get to where we can get into these deeply mutually transformative, right, dialogos about relationships to sacredness, such that it's reasonable to believe, in the Belaban sense, that we're affording the advent of the sacred. We're affording its presencing in people's lives in a way that could matter to them. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't, and I hope I showed up that way. I wasn't trying to refute anything. I wanted to get the juice out, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think there's also something that this is, and I want to be careful, that people don't take this the wrong way, because I really am a Christian in every way. I really believe Christianity is the fullest revelation, but there's also a more practical aspect, which is that there's a real practical aspect to the idea that we can't be meta. Like, we're not meta practitioners. And I think that's important too, is that the reality of being a Christian is not lived in asking, how better is it from Zen, let's say, right? It's lived in your morning prayers and going to communion and to confession and to, and living it with your family and your community. So that's also that's something that can't be completely ignored, right, in the discussion, that although there are probably better people than us to argue the fine points of theology and of and the differences, let's say, in the metaphysics of the different systems. At least I know that there are better people than me to do that. But there is also that other part, which I think is important, which is, like I said, that the Christianity I live is, that's it. It's like I go to church on Sundays and I live my life in relationship with God, and it's something that's real and existential, and I actually, although it has happened in my life where I've had to ask myself that question, about different systems in moments of crisis, let's say, that is definitely not something that feeds my everyday life. Like I don't ask those questions most of the time.
I don't want to
Most people
trespass.
don't, most people don't either, because
Yeah,
they
I'm
live
not,
they live in the world that they live in.
I'm
And
not trying to trespass on that at all. But you don't want that to become a justification of insularity,
no,
right?
obviously,
Because I mean, and this is part of, I think where Jordan and I still agree. The world needs to form a some kind of common unity, or else we're in a lot of trouble. And it's not going to happen. And now we're in the practical domain now. So we've all agreed, we've left down the theology. It's not going to happen by converting the world into Christianity. At least you've been trying for 2,000 years. It hasn't happened. And so I have a good inductive argument. And so I think, again, we're now agreed that we've moved into the practical domain. At this practical domain, trying to afford this kind of deep dialogos is, I think, what is pertinent now in that practical domain.
yeah. Well, I think there's always room for learning from each other, and I think that's not I don't think that's not a problem at all. I don't see that as an issue, and you can even learn from other people's. You can meet a Muslim, meet a Zen practitioner, meet a Jew, meet someone who's not in your religion, and find deep admiration of their moral strength, of their faith, of their of how they're transformed by something that is beyond them. And I think, at least in my opinion, I don't think that that's an issue at all for me. And so I think that there has to be ways that we can encounter others and learn from each other and see what's good about other world, without it being trying to formulate constantly which world is better. Like,
no,
you see what I'm saying? Like
you just articulated the philosophical Silk Road. Yeah. That's exactly the philosophical Silk Road project, as you just articulated it.
Yeah, it definitely isn't ideological, right? You can say for certain this definitely has nothing to do with competing ideologies or the desire to create a totalizing universal meta ideology. Right? Definitely not that.
Even eschatologically, if you look at the way that's described in Scripture, the idea that all people are going to become Christian is just not there. It's just not in the story. Like, it actually seems to go the other way. It actually seems to go like, a bunch of people are going to become Christian, and then people are going to hate you and they're going to persecute you. So it's not gonna play out like in this. I think that Islam has might have a more of a tendency to think that we're just going to everybody's going to become this thing. Although Christians have, definitely are evangelized, but I don't see how even in Christianity's own cosmology, you can imagine that at some point everybody's just going to become Christian, like in the eschaton,
Yeah, I mean, there are Eastern Orthodox, David Bentley Hart, who are Universalists.
In the eschaton, though, he's not a Universalist in Chronos, is he?
Yeah, David. I love David Bentley Hart. I loved his writings for many years. I thought he was amazing. I think sadly, he's slipping into syncretism. His universalism is pushing him towards more of a syncretic approach, and so I think that's kind of too bad. A lot of his ideas are still really useful.
You mean bad syncretism, because all religions are syncretist in some fashion.
Yes, but they're not. So everything that exists is syncretist to some fashion, and then it finds unity in the multiplicity. But when you
mean a fragmented syncretism.
What I mean is that when you formulate it as syncretism, like when you formulate it as a kind of as a kind of multiplicity that isn't joined, that doesn't have to be joined in some kind of unitary practice, then I think that's a dangerous, like hodgepodge I think that
Yeah. I get what you're
Gnosticism
saying.
is very
Non. Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
temptation, right? Temptation, which is the inverse of communion, that which brings a multiplicity into a false unity that is actually just what's that called in material science? Like we take sand. Sand is actually not actually a whole thing. If you melt it in the glass, it is.
Yeah.
So something that's interesting just to think about is the degree to which we each have particular callings. We're friends, and I think becoming better friends, which is really fun.
Yeah, I love it too.
And those callings are distinct, right? John is called to this philosophical self-road, and that's a thing, and that's a role. It's a critical element of what's going on. And Jonathan is clearly just getting better and better at looking really good on the internet and embodying beauty in a way that's just impossible to avoid. With any luck, right? My calling is to retire peacefully and quietly in the mountains of North Carolina and eat barbecue. So it's very liberating, actually, I think, to recognize that if we live the way that we're living, following our calling, and entering into relationships that are truly grounded in this requirement of to love one another, then whatever else is happening, we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think it's fair to say that was my intent from the beginning. Right, it was to try and do that. I'm sort of done the problematic I wanted to bring and have you two respond. And again, I think you both responded very well. I genuine dialogos. I got to places I couldn't get to on my own, and that matter to me and make me think deeper. On a more personal note, I'm on a long journey of a kind of rapprochement with Christianity, and this has been I'm not saying I'm going to become a Christian or anything like that, but this coming to a place where I think I can, as much as possible, be healed from just a traumatic apprehension of Christianity. So I wanted to thank you of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, happy we can play a role in that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so I think this was the time we had allotted to ourselves. I think we came to a good spot. As you know, these conversations, they're always the beginning. They can go on forever. And so thank you both of you for your time and your forthright stance. I really always appreciate it. It's wonderful. And remind everybody, by the way, that I am going to be in Florida with Jordan Hall also. And so there might still be tickets to that event. I don't know. We'll put a link to it if there are tickets to it. But we're going to spend a whole weekend together with a few people, having feasting and drinking wine and having wonderful discussions. It's going to be absolutely great. And don't forget that John will be doing a course on the Cogsci ritual, and I'll be part of that as well. So let's keep finding reasons to speak to each other and work together. So.
Here.
All right, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Much love, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.